A list of items is always nice to have, but actually you can't always rely on previous valuations or things like that, because mistakes do happen every now and then. Something is called a certain gem or it's a different carat weight. So you really have to do the work from scratch to avoid any confusion, any mistakes, or you can pick up on something that was perhaps misdescribed and therefore potentially misvalued. So lists are very useful. The one thing that really helps are certificates. So certificates for diamonds, whether they are 50 pointers or 5 carats, always great to have, because obviously they will give all the exact weight and color and description, whereas when I'm looking at an item, a stone that's mounted, the mount gets in the way of being able to really assess perfectly well a gemstone. Obviously I'm not in a laboratory, so the conditions are a little bit different. So a certificate, that's the key piece that if a client has, beneficial. A diamond line necklace and you have certificates for every stone, that's very helpful because you have exact weights, exact color and clarity, and you can really give a perfect value for the diamond line bracelet.
And these are predominantly GIA certificates that you see?
GIA you'll see a lot, mostly for diamonds or colored diamonds. It doesn't mean that you don't get GIA certificates for stones such as sapphires and rubies, but the other very well-known and renowned laboratory for colored stones is Gobelin, and you have other laboratories such as HRD or IGI. They're a little bit less severe, let's say, with their identification and their grading. So I'm always a little bit careful when I'm faced with one of those certificates. Not to say that they're wrong, but just it's good to just double check what you're actually looking at. I had an example quite recently, actually, during one of my trips in Jersey, and a client presented me with an HRD certificate, and on the certificate you have the drawing of a diamond and where you can find potential inclusions, and it's called a plot. And they had forgotten to plot some of the inclusions, and it really impacted on the clarity grade and therefore the value that I then gave the diamond. So,
gosh, well, that's something to check up on, isn't it? But also, obviously, these people are very credible, but also you do get some rather bizarre certificates. I think I've seen a few over my years coming with rubies out of Thailand and places like that, which are not, shall we say, legitimate.
No, they would just say sapphire or corundum, which is absolutely fine, but it doesn't give you whether it's natural, or synthetic, or if it's been treated, and if so, what sort of treatment. So always be wary of any non-reputable certificates, even if you do think that you're buying a gem with all the right paperwork. It's good to just be a bit cautious. The first thing, first lay out all my equipment. I usually come with a suitcase, but if I were to start with a diamond ring, my first item of my equipment that I would get out would be my loop. This is a 10 times loop, and I wouldn't go anywhere without it. It's the key to any beginning of valuation. So it's 10 times. And this particular one has different lights on it. It has light and UV light on it. And this is key to firstly identify what stone it is. In this case, I have a diamond ring. So I would be able to identify whether it was a diamond or a simulant or a white sapphire or something else. And it's also very helpful to see if there's any marks on the metal which is very important, because if there's a signature, then you know that that's going to have an impact on the value and on the quality of the make. You'll often see, for example, items by Cartier will have that little extra attention to detail, and the finish of the piece will be softer and really well finished, whereas something that you might buy, say, on a market, as you mentioned, Thailand, might have slightly rougher edges. So the loop would be the number one piece of equipment that I start with. And then following that, I would then look at measurements of stones. So for that, we have different options, depending on the mount and depending on the size of it. For this ring, for example, the diamonds are in a sort of open setting. So I have a piece of equipment that's very important. It's called a presidium. The presidium has numbers all around, and it will give you precise dimension of a stone. And you have two options to measure a stone. You have this side, if you can access the stone relatively easily, or if you have a stone that has a collet setting all around the stone, you would use this side to access the points of it. You also get an extra little piece that comes with it to calculate the depth of the stone if the setting is quite tricky. So it's just an extra piece of equipment, but very precious. So that's one piece that I can use to measure the stones. If I have a piece of jewellery that has, let's say, pave setting or smaller stones, I will use what's called spread gauges. Now you'll notice I've got three. And why three? Because you get all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they're not actually all on the same spread gauge. So I do vary between one or another depending on the cut of the stone. So these are very helpful if you're looking at smaller stones and you can't really access the sides of the stone to measure exactly. Or if you have a very large piece that has several stones, you can't count each stone individually using the presidium. So you'd use a spread gauge, and it would be an approximation of the carat weight. So those are the items that I would use to look at the carat weight, and then you do some calculations. Firstly, you need to identify the stone properly. Make sure that you are actually looking at the right stone, because that will impact the calculations, because every stone has a different, what's called specific gravity, which is a different weight variation, and that impacts on the calculations that you would use to calculate the carat weight. And then, of course, you have, depending on the cut of the stone, a different adjustment there as well. So there's all these factors to take into consideration. Essentially, the absolute key is making sure you've identified the stone properly. And for that, for diamonds, if I was a bit unsure, I could use what's called the diamond tester, and that would give me a little sound to tell me whether it is a diamond or not. So I've switched it on. So this is very, very practical as well, but when you have a piece, again, with smaller stones, and it's very difficult with just the use of a loop to try and really identify the stone because of the setting and the gold or the metal that surrounds it. So this is very practical to just place on the stone, and it will tell you whether it's a diamond or not. If it's not, it doesn't make any sound. You can get these diamond testers that will tell you whether it's moissanite or CZ, for example. This one just tells me if it's diamond or not, and this will work with the other simulants. If it's not a diamond and I need to identify which stone it is, I have a very fancy piece of equipment, which is a refractometer. You have a torch that you screw on at the back, and this will really be the key piece of equipment to help me pin down what sort of stone I'm looking at. It's very useful, for example, for pink stones, because there's quite a few that actually look quite similar, and you'd need another test other than a loop to be sure of what you. I'm thinking more morganite, or these stones that are not used as much. Tourmaline compared to ruby is quite different. Once you know what you're looking at, what you're looking for, you can tell the difference. The color, everything is quite different. So it's sometimes very useful as well for, I mentioned white sapphires, so that's quite useful because they can really lead to confusion, white sapphires. So this refractometer will help me identify, or at least narrow it down to one stone or another. So the way it works is you get given what's called RI liquid, refractive index liquid, and you place a little bit on the inside of the refractometer. So it opens and you have a little piece of glass, and you put a drop of the smallest amount of liquid on here, and then you'd place the stone. You'd have to switch on the torch so that you can actually read what numbers are showing up through the screen. So what are those numbers? Those numbers are the refractive index of a gemstone, and what that is that the refractometer calculates the speed at which light bends once it enters the stone. Because it's denser than air, it has a different speed than when light passes through air. So that piece of equipment will help identify that. And stones are either doubly refractive or singly refractive, just to add a bit of confusion. Zircon are strongly doubly refractive, and what that means is that once the light enters the stone, it splits again and exits the stone in different directions. And in fact, a stone like zircon, when you look at it just with a 10-time loop, you can actually see that there's doubling inside. It's like you've got blurred vision. It's really quite interesting. So this, the measurements given on the refractometer will give me 1 or 2 numbers. And depending on that, if it's 1 number, it will tell me that it's a singly refractive gemstone. And if it gives me 2 numbers, it's a doubly refractive gemstone. So again, that will help me identify what gem we are looking at. Then just some overall description in terms of the metal. So we can look at whether it's platinum, gold, or silver, and usually you'll find some marks on the piece of jewelry. If it's a ring, it's usually inside the band. If it's a bracelet, it's towards the tongue and the clasp. So that will be of big impact as well, given the price variations of platinum and gold, especially right now. So that's key, and it will give you also hallmarks or signatures, and all that contributes to the quality and then the price of an item. So that's what I would be looking for. And then we're just looking at some measurements. And if it's a ring, for example, I've got the ring sizer, and that will tell me what the size of the band is. So that's always very practical. There we are. And if you have a necklace or a bracelet, I'll just use a simple ruler to see what the measurements are there. Use stones, which doesn't happen very often. I will use specific tweezers, and they've got little grooves inside to really grab the stone properly. And they also lock, because loose gems have a tendency to have a life of their own, and they just pop out. So they lock, which is very handy as well. And also, one piece of equipment that you never go without anywhere is a gem cloth. So this one is a specific cloth that will really remove any grease and any product left on a stone. So diamonds are the one stone that keep the most grease. So it's very important to clean that, so that then you're able to assess the color and clarity, especially the color. Sometimes you do have a little bit more dust or let's call it dirt, because that's what it is, and that can impact the color of the stone. So I would recommend just use use a toothbrush, very liquid and warm, warm water to give everything a clean, and you'll find that your jewelry has a second life suddenly. And also then it helps whoever's looking at your jewelry to identify the color of a stone in good condition. To help me with that as well, I've got what's called a grading card. So it's a piece of card that you then fold in a particular manner, and the way it then ends up when it's folded is useful for when you have loose stones as well, because you can roll them and it won't slide. So it's a particular way of folding the card. So this white card will help identify the color. So what you do is you place your ring, your diamond piece of jewelry, and you put it in your piece of card, and you look at how different of a color it is compared to a white background, and that will help give a color for the diamond. But that is only useful if you've got good daylight, rather than a very yellow or pink light that might be very superficial and add some different colors to the stone. So with that in mind, I'll always have my my desk lamp, which is a daylight equivalent, which will give me the best light. It does happen, unfortunately. So yes, it has happened. It's never a very nice conversation to have with the client. So I do always try to see what's happened to the piece of jewelry. Has it been taken in for repair? Has the stone been lost? And then the client's decided to replace it just with a simulant, because you wouldn't tell the difference unless you're actually looking at it with a loupe. So yes, it has happened. Not my most favorite moments that I can recall, but it's always good to get at least a good indication of what you actually own, and then you're not overpaying on insurance. But equally, I've had the opposite of several clients who have then come to realize that actually they own diamonds which they thought were just costume jewelry. So that's a nice conversation to have. So so the lab-grown diamonds are impossible to identify with the equipment that a valuer would have. You would have to send your diamond to a laboratory and ask for a specific report on whether or not it's a natural diamond or a lab-grown diamond, because only with their equipment, huge machine, can they tell the difference. Essentially, a lab-grown diamond has all the same properties, the same atomic combination than a natural grown diamond. So no, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference.